Welcome to Life After Philosophy, where I interview former students about philosophy's effect on their lives. I'm Christopher Annandale. Welcome to Life After Philosophy. My guest today is Tom Venzor. Tom is the executive director of the Nebraska Catholic Conference and a 2016 graduate of Mount St. Mary's University with a master's degree in philosophy, and has studied philosophy a good bit before that. Tom, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dr. Annandale. Happy to be on the show.
Thanks for coming. I appreciate you appearing here on a sort of untested podcast near the very beginning. I thought we might begin with a little bit about your current situation, your background, your bio, your story, maybe starting from where you are now, what you do on a daily basis in your job with the Nebraska Catholic Conference, and then take a look back at your education in philosophy from some years ago, and then perhaps finish up the conversation talking about the links that you see between them. Would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, great. That'd be wonderful. So I'm currently serving as the executive director of the Nebraska Catholic Conference. For those of you who don't know what a Catholic conference is, it's essentially the public policy arm of the Catholic Church. Nearly every state in the country has one of these Catholic conferences. So I serve in Nebraska. And basically, my work is government relations work, lobbying work, public policy work. So we work with the three branches of government in state government here in Nebraska. And then also we work on federal public policy issues as well. But predominantly, my main focus is on state legislative policy. So I work a lot with our state Senate, our unicameral here in Nebraska. And I've been doing that now for about 8 years at the Catholic Conference. Before I was executive director, I served as our pro-life and family policy director. I've been doing that for quite a while. And it's wonderful work. I tell people the work of public policy in law is really, I think it's just philosophy in really fancy terminology. Because I think a lot of the public policy positions really come down to what is your worldview, in that sense, what is your all-encompassing worldview? And so I typically think whether it's a tax issue, whether it's a pro-life issue, whether it is an agriculture issue, whether it is a judiciary issue, all of them have some background philosophical worldview on how they see the world, how it should function, who the human person is, how they should be in community, etc. So that's kind of my work in public policy. It's a lot of fun and work for the three bishops here in Nebraska. To kind of reverse us, my educational background. So I'm from Nebraska and did my undergraduate in Nebraska at Doane College. And I originally started off just being a political science major, thinking, I really like politics, state politics in particular, and I'll just study political science. Eventually, I got an interest in religious studies, which at my school, at my alma mater, was actually mostly theology and a lot of scripture studies. So I started studying religious studies, and then I realized there's this program over here called the philosophy program. So I'm like, hey, I think that would be fun to study as well. So I had a triple major in undergrad in political science, religious studies, and philosophy. And I was kind of a late bloomer my junior year in the philosophy department. And so did that, graduated in 2007 from there, and actually discerned going into the seminary for the Archdiocese of Omaha. So there I spent 1 year at Conception Seminary with you, Dr. Annandale, at one of your former employers. And so I studied there for a year, which was wonderful. I already had my philosophy degree under my belt. So I studied a decent amount of philosophy there, but because I had a lot of philosophy already, I was able to study other things like Latin and Greek and monastic history and other kind of cool things. But only discerned a year of seminary there, and then left because I didn't think the Lord was calling me to the priesthood, and actually went to law school, which had been kind of my intentions in undergrad. I always thought I'll go to law school and I can go work in public policy and things of that nature. So I went to law school for 3 years. And that's where I learned of Catholic conferences and did some internship work at that time in law school. But law school really helped me understand that, wow, we're basically just having a bunch of philosophical arguments and we're couching them in legalese. But whether you're judges or legislators or you name it, there's a lot of philosophy going on. So studied law school, went to law school for 3 years, passed the bar, became an attorney. and worked for a year after law school, actually in youth ministry and also doing some immigration law on the side. And then kind of rediscerned God was calling me back, to discern the priesthood a little more. So then went back for 2 years and studied out at Mount St. Mary's again with Dr. Anadel. And so it was wonderful, those 2 years at Mount St. Mary's. And while I was there, I did the master's in philosophy program out there, which was really incredible. So
I was saying a moment ago that I think you may be the only student alive who's taken philosophy with me at two different institutions. I'd moved on by the time you went to law school and came back. So I was really appreciated having you both times. Go ahead, carry on, please.
no, yeah. So that's kind of really I loved it. It was good coming to the mountain, having familiar faces right when you showed up. But yeah, that was kind of my time at the Mount. Did the master's in philosophical studies there, which was really incredible. Just a way to go deeper in my philosophical studies during that time. And so then also was able to study a little bit of theology there too, as well, in graduate theology. But after that, discerned that the Lord wasn't calling me, to the priesthood. And so shortly thereafter, you know, um, left, went back out into the world. I hadn't spoken to my now wife. I dated her while I was in law school. I hadn't talked to her for 3 years, but went and hunted her down and found her, and she didn't slap me in the face. And the rest of the story is we got married. Now we have 3 children in the home, one in heaven, and then one on the way this fall. So it's a wonderful life now being in the vocation of marriage with children. So
Congratulations. Very happy for you, Tom.
thank you.
So one thing I might clarify for maybe for listeners who are not familiar with the Catholic Church is that the Church, for men discerning the priesthood, who might wish to be priests or to be considered for priesthood, are required to study 2 years of philosophy prior to beginning theology studies. So basically, every seminarian or candidate for the priesthood essentially has to major in philosophy, acquire the equivalent of a bachelor's degree in philosophy, or perhaps, as in your case, a master's degree. But there are, as the Lord calls people, some people are considered and discern that they're not called, so they might exit the priestly formation track during or after philosophy formation, which seems to have been the case with you both times. But why don't we get to the question of the value of the philosophy education? You've spoken a little bit about the way you think law school and also public policy seem to be kind of philosophy in disguise. I wonder if you might describe it this way: does philosophy serve as a kind of bridge between a theological worldview and the sort of secular rough and tumble of politics, or instead of a bridge, is it a sort of larger context in which those things are situated? What's the right metaphor, you think, for understanding the way philosophy fits into the kind of things you're doing in the world today?
Yeah, wow. I'm going to do the classic both and. I think philosophy is both of those things. I think it's the context within which everybody is thinking. I think when I often think of philosophy, I think of it being that overarching way of life, your way of thinking, how you bring everything in the world together, and how you think through that. And I think that's what's always going on in politics. I think that's what's going on also in theology. You're trying to think big, you're trying to think sort of meta, you're trying to think, the totality of circumstances and things around you. But also, yeah, but it's also, I think, a bridge into those things because for me, having that philosophical education was really critical to being able to understand and think more deeply about theological issues. Or also, when it comes to public policy, I can see a piece of public policy and not only judge it on the merits of, is this sort of good or bad for society? Will this maybe produce greater economic development or lesser economic development or what have you? But I can also see this idea has a philosophical thing at its core, and is this idea a good idea, a bad idea, or what have you? And where's it coming from, and what's that logical end of that idea? And so I think philosophy serves both, as a context and as a bridge into both of these things. And so, really to talk about what's the value of that philosophy degree, I really found the value of the philosophy degree, particularly as it pertained to studies for the priesthood, was it was there making me more human. I often thought in my undergraduate, I always really thought of philosophy as being this sort of cerebral, intellectual exercise. I just read words on pages, I read ideas, I analyze them. I think about them, and then I write a really verbose essay. In the more words I use, that I don't actually know what they mean, the better off that I am. And I'm good at arguing and rhetoric and other things of that nature. But as I sort of deepen my studies in philosophy, I began to see more and more how philosophy was making me more human, how it was actually helping me see sort of the power of the intellectual life, but also the power of the moral life. And also later on at my time at the Mount, really the power of the affective life and how important the affective life is to the study of philosophy and to sort of life in general. And so, really, philosophy, the value of it for me was being able to become, I think, more human, to really understand myself as you know, yeah, what I was made for and where I was going and those kind of things. So, yeah, I would say that philosophy had a deep value beyond just sort of practicalities of a degree.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's really, really powerful testimony. One of the things I say sometimes to beginning seminarians in the study of philosophy is that it will, in a sense, make you more human. It'll give you a greater self-possession, a greater degree of self-knowledge. Pope John Paul writes about the importance of philosophy as a discipline for, we might say, kind of synthesizing a sense of self, for forming a full self-possession, which he says is the only basis for a total gift of self to the people of God in the ordained ministry. But one of my takeoffs from that point is that one might not make a total gift of oneself simply to ordained ministry. That's also what one does in marriage. It's also what one does as a father. So when you say it's made you more human, I thought to ask as a follow-up question, is it made you a better father, a better husband? Has it given you this kind of increased, I almost say, like grasp of yourself to make a greater gift of yourself in those contexts? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think philosophy has absolutely helped, my vocation to marriage, my vocation to my children. I think of this in two ways. First of all, I think about, the Platonic tradition and sort of the unexamined life is not worth living. And I think about how often in my marriage I have to stop and I have to think about, okay, my own actions, my own behaviors, the things that I'm teaching my own children about the world, about human interaction, about human nature, about their own worth and dignity and value. And so I often have to stop and reflect, am I being a good husband today? Am I being a good dad today? And a lot of that I think is just contemplative reflection on your life. Again, I think early on I thought philosophy was just this ethereal, abstraction that you do, like when you're sitting in, a study. But as I came more and more to learn and value philosophy, it really is a reflection on daily life in understanding and going as deep as possible into the interior of one's life to more truly understand what it means to be human. So I do think that there's a great value there. The other great value that you mentioned, John Paul II, I actually think one of the most important works I've actually ever read is his little play, The Jeweler's Shop, which is a complete reflection on marriage. And he's in the jeweler's shop, he's kind of reflecting on three different couples, in sort of a younger couple and a couple older couples, and kind of their working through engagement and marriage. And I think of the depths of that work and how much it impacted me, and how we sat. Here was John Paul II, as a young priest writing this play. He's a celibate, but yet his depth of understanding about the value and the beauty of marriage and human relationship was something he was able to comprehend because of his philosophical studies, his theological studies, his pastoral work with families, with married couples. And so, to me, because of my philosophical studies, I was able to access works like The Jeweler's Shop, which helped just enrich my understanding and expand my understanding of the beauty of marriage and committed relationship and the beauty of human love, really at the core.
This ties in with some of your comments before about the development of the affective life, the emotional life, the sort of ownership of one's own feelings and one's own desires, and sort of shaping the self and knowing just what you are. That's valuable in marriage as well as in the celibate priesthood, certainly.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, because when you're talking about affective life, you again, even when you read sort of these sort of self-help books or things like, what the five love languages, what's your love language, and how do you understand it? Then you realize as a philosopher, you read those, you go, oh, come on, that's just sort of, silly self-help stuff. But then if when you take these things seriously, you realize, okay, no, there's a philosophy at the core of this. It's a philosophy that's trying to teach me sort of who am I at my core? What is my human nature? How is that particularized for me? What are the gifts that I have? What are the gifts that I have to give to another? What are the gifts that I need to receive as a human so that I can flourish? And again, all those things, that philosophy has helped me understand sort of the value of any number of things, including just, probing into that affective life. So I understand myself, the depth of my own emotion, the depth of my wife's emotion, the depth of my children's emotions, because those are so core and constitutive to who we are as human beings.
It sounds like we're talking about philosophy in service to life, in sense of all the aspects of life, wife, children, practical work, as well as classroom work. Let me ask you another question, if I may. We're
Yeah,
coming close to the end of our time.
yeah, please do.
You work in public policy, which means you're working in what might be called the sphere of public reason, of secular reason, of language and reasons that are often interpreted to exclude the dogmatic and the religious and the revealed truth. And one reason I'm interested in this particular perspective of yours is that philosophy seems to offer something of a way of talking about what I call the Catholic worldview or the Christian worldview that is grounded in reason, that can speak the language of reason, and that need not be excluded from political debate on the grounds that it's the fruit of some kind of arbitrary dogmatism. But as you say, it really enters into politics on politics' own terms, that there's a philosophy implicit in whatever public policy is being proposed. We should discuss whether it's a good or a bad philosophy, a philosophy that serves life or damages life, a philosophy that is internally coherent or that has some serious problems to it. Have you found that to be a kind of practical element of the work that you've been doing for the past 7 or 8 years?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I see philosophy going on everywhere, particularly for the issues that I work on as the director of the Catholic Conference. We're working on a lot of big moral issues. So these are issues that people have very different opinions on. They come from very different moral groundings for why they believe their particular view, etc. And what I often tell people when I'm lobbying or doing public policy is when they try to tell me, as a Catholic conference director, well, you can't bring your, religious arguments to the table, or that's sort of your view, or what have you. It's really easy to say, look, you're coming at this with your own philosophical worldview. And in fact, I would argue that the view you're holding is its own theological understanding of the world. And so when you begin to tell them, if you want to try to exclude my argument, then you ought to also exclude your argument. If the terms of engagement are you can't bring philosophical stances to the table, or you can't bring theological stances to the table. But in particular, for me and for us as Catholics, is to recognize that we have both faith and reason, and they go hand in hand, etc. And so I can argue and I can work with them off of just sort of purely reasonable grounds, purely sort of philosophical grounds, and frankly, that's what we do most of the time. Yeah, occasionally we're citing this encyclical or this portion of the catechism, but it's oftentimes just saying this is just fundamentally what's right, and let me argue it to you from a philosophical perspective, or from where the public policy arguments are, or from where the scientific research is. And so we are really able to bridge that gap, I think, of bringing those larger ideas to the public policy square, but immediately telling people, don't think that you can exclude certain types of arguments from the public square, because that in and of itself is a philosophical view. And by the way, I think it's a wrong one. But we're able to bring that to the table because as a philosopher, as a trained philosopher, I'm able to see that argument's being made, and I know how to respond to it. But otherwise, I don't think if I had that philosophical training, I wouldn't be able to call that out for what it is. So anyways, yeah, that's where I think that philosophical training really helps in those situations.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Let me ask you one final question then. I forget whether I said this to you 7 or 8 years ago when you were last my student, but I do sometimes say to people I'm teaching today, that in some ways your job is going to be harder than mine because you're going to have to go out into the world and be even a better philosophy teacher than I was. You're going to have to teach this to people who are not paying attention to you in a classroom setting, motivated by all the institutions of the university and the classroom. You're going to have to find a way to communicate these philosophical truths to people and persuade them of them in a context that's radically different. You're going to have to be much more subtle than I am. You're going to have to be much more determined over a longer period of time than I have had to be in the classroom. Have you found that paid off in your experience? Have you ever thought of yourself as actually having to teach philosophy in some fashion?
Yeah, so I've always had the desire to want to still teach sort of like in an academic setting. That was one of my like early desires. I want to get a PhD in philosophy and teach and et cetera. But yeah, I don't know if I often think of myself as like in my work as teaching philosophy so much as doing philosophy. But I do think there's a teaching element. But you're right, there's a real struggle for me in particular in the realm of public policy and very much being sort of a public face in the work that I do on behalf of the church. It's everything from being in front of a camera to do a 30-second soundbite for television news, to doing a 5-minute committee hearing testimony, to pulling a senator out for 10 minutes and talking to them about a particular idea and why this idea is good and you ought to adopt it, or bad and you ought not to adopt it. But in all of those moments, I'm trying to distill major ideas like the value of the human person and trying to figure out, okay, how can I tell people about the value of the human person in 30 seconds? Because that's the only blurb I'm going to get on the 10 o'clock news tonight. And so, yeah, you're constantly thinking, how do I refine my language? How do I message well? And that gets into, skills of communication. But also when we think of the classical tradition of, Aristotle and thinking about the gifts of rhetoric and logic and argumentation and those things, how can I present myself in a way that gets to people's intellectual life, or how do I move them to want to do the good, or how do I move their emotions in this 30-second soundbite, in this 5-minute testimony, or in this maybe 10-minute interaction out in the lobby of the rotunda of the legislature. So yeah, I think that philosophy is always coming into play in trying to teach people bit by bit what I think a good sound philosophical worldview looks like.
That's marvelous. Thank you so much, Tom. This has been excellent. I've really enjoyed our conversation together today. Was there anything you'd like to share here from the Nebraska Catholic Conference, the website, or any upcoming events that people could know about?
Yeah. So yeah, for the Nebraska Catholic Conference, our website is necatholic.org. That's letter N, letter E, like Nebraska. So necatholic.org. We have a website there where you can see a lot of our work. You can see the bills that we work on. We work, like I said, pro-life bills, education issues, those social issues to help, the poor, or to get rid of the death penalty or things of that nature. So we're working on a whole just slew and spectrum of issues, which is really, really fun because we get to kind of have our hands in a lot of different things. But we're also on, Facebook or Instagram, so you can find us in Nebraska Catholic Conference there. So yeah, we're kind of in all those places. So it's really exciting. Hey, Dr. Anadel, real quick, one question you didn't ask, and I thought it might be worth addressing was,
Yeah,
like, do I have any regrets, or there, kind of like, would I have done anything different? And do you mind if I answer that?
absolutely. Go ahead,
Yeah.
please.
So when I think of my formal philosophy studies in the academic setting, and I look back and I go, could I have done, if I could go back and do it different or do it again, what would I do? Here's what I would tell students studying philosophy. Right now, I have a group of friends, a group of us guys who get together once a month, and we've been doing this now for about 5 years, and we're basically doing a great books club. So we started with
Wow.
Homer, we started with the Iliad and the Odyssey, and we just did the Greek plays and just kept pushing forward. And right now we've got to Augustine, and our joke is that we'll be in the nursing home by the time we get to like the 17th century, because we're just passing through history. But it's really cool because we have guys from all different backgrounds, doctors, lawyers, tradesmen, teachers, you name it. But we read these great works and then come together and discuss them. And it's helped me realize some of the gaps that I had in my own education when I came into my philosophical studies. I think I had an okay, education growing up, K through 12, but I really lacked in places like literature, or even some of the ancient works. Like when I first studied philosophy in my undergrad, I hadn't studied Homer. And really, I didn't read Homer till after I got completely done with my formal academic studies. And when I went back to read Homer and then read, Plato and Socrates again, after I had read Homer, I'm like, how on earth did I miss reading Homer? He's being quoted like every other page, by Plato. And I'm like, how did I miss this? You can't see what you can't see. So, anyways, I encourage, in your formal academic studies, it's really easy to kind of just hone in on all the big, thick tomes of Plato, Aristotle, Thomas, Kant, Heidegger, whatever the case might be, and you end up missing out on some of the great philosophical works that maybe aren't formally studied or maybe aren't formally thought to be, philosophy per se, but they have a great bearing on the philosophical tradition. So I would encourage you, get out and read those works as well in your spare time, so to speak. But also the value of literature as philosophy. I never saw that in my formal academic studies. So now I always thought, who wants to read, who wants to read a novel when you can go read, von Hildebrand, or when you can go read Marcel or something like that. Why would you want to go read, some fiction novel? But I learned, reading like Flannery O'Connor or Walker Percy or even Albert Camus, who kind of, bleeds into the philosophical realm, or the other things like Cormac McCarthy. Like you see how richly they are doing philosophy in their work of fiction or in their novels. So, anyways, I think it's great to learn the value of that, because then you can kind of get away from the analytical, I've got to read every word to understand this argument, to opening up this new realm of realizing, wow, Flannery O'Connor is doing this great work reflecting on some Nietzschean idea, in Good Country People. And you're like, wow, holy smokes, there's philosophy going on throughout this whole work, but it's also a really good novel that's very entertaining and fun to read. So that's, I go back and I say, boy, if I could have done it different knowing this, I think I would have told my old self, hey, focus on some of these things. So that would be my advice to younger undergraduate students or graduate students or others who might be thinking about life after philosophy. Delve into those works, because I think they really enrich your philosophical training and in acumen. So, yeah.
That's fantastic. It's marvelous, Tom. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful for the conversation today. This is Life After Philosophy. My guest today has been Tom Venzor of the Nebraska Catholic Conference. Thanks again, Tom, for appearing on the show.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, and best of luck with the show.
Thanks you as well. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to Life After Philosophy. If you enjoyed the podcast, please rate it 5 stars and share this episode with a friend. I appreciate your support.